Welcome to Cheap Controls. We make videos on things that we struggled with, hoping to help you so you don't. Consider subscribing and hitting that bell.
In this video, I'm going to go over the text box that's on the Nextion display. I found that it behaves very similarly in the debug as it does in the actual display, so I'm going to stick to the debug for now. For each one of these Nextion videos, I'm going to try to remember to put the version of the editor and the type of display I'm using up so that you know what I'm working with so you can compare it to what you're working with. I have a single text box here, and I haven't done anything to it yet. I've added 2 fonts, and I've added 2 pictures. I have a list here of all of the attributes that you can use on this, and if you notice, some of them are in black and some of them are in green. The ones that are in green, you can edit when the program is running. The ones that are in black have to be set up while you're in this editor, and then once you start the program, you can't change those. I'm going to use the password attribute, or this PW, to illustrate this. And you can see that you have two choices here, character or password. Now, when you choose this now, you select it by word. I want it to be the password, and you can see that its asterisk is up here. I'll move this down a little bit closer. And when I change it to character, it has the characters. Now, when you want to change this programmatically, you have to use numbers instead of the words. So for the drop-down list, character would be 0 and password would be 1. So all the attributes are 0-based. For this example, I've added a timer down here. I have the timer set to go every 400 milliseconds. I'm going to change that to every 2 seconds. I'm just going to toggle between setting that password field to 0 or 1. So if it's 0, we're going to change it to 1. If it's 1, we're going to set it to 0. I'll run this in debug and you'll see what I mean. So we have our field down here, and you can see that every 2 seconds it goes between password and text. And the reason that I want to illustrate that is in the password, it's not setting it equal to character or equal to password. It's setting it equal to 0 or 1. So when you're sending the codes from like an Arduino or an ESP32, that's how you would do it. And you wouldn't need the quotations around it either. So it would just be t0.pw equals 1. Now for this type field up here, the text field will always be a 116. So if I add multiple text fields, they'll all be type 116. And different types of fields, like if I go down to the timer, it's of type 51. So if I added another timer, it would be type 51. Now for advanced programming, that comes in handy. The ID, on the other hand, that changes. It increments every time you add something to the page. So the ID for the text box is 1. The ID for the timer is 2, and if I add another text box, it becomes 3. And you'll need to have a unique ID for each item on the page, and that's so you can reference it in a different way also. I don't want to get the text box mixed around, so I'm putting the second one I put down here and the original one up. The object name, you can name this whatever you want, but it does have to be unique. So I'm going to call this text. And then for the vscope, if it's local and you leave the page and you come back, it'll go back to its default setting. If you change this to global, it will stay whatever it was when you leave the page and you come back. I've compiled it locally, and you can see that the global memory is 16. And that the page memory is 328. I'm going to recompile it as global. And you see that it's changed. So the global memory is now 112. And down here it's 112. But this number over here, 328, stays the same. That's because we don't have multiple pages. If you really start digging into this and you add global variables and multiple pages, it carries that memory across all the pages. And you can start to use memory up pretty fast. In the intelligent displays, you've got plenty of memory. But in some of the basic ones, you do have to be careful about that. This drag attribute, it's interesting because you can use it, and if it's set to yes, you can drag the item around with your finger. In this case, we'll use debug, so I'll have to use the mouse, but you'll see what I mean. But I'm going to add something to this. I'm going to add a little bit of code to this button. So on press, we're going to say text.txt equals press. And on release, or on release, we're going to have it say release. But what I need to do is I need to eliminate the timer from running. It's still configured to run. So I'm going to delete all of this. I made a mistake. I named this one text, and I wanted this one to be text. We'll change this name back. Now, not only did I change the name on this, I also had to change it back to drag. You'll notice that now it's yellow. This one down here is global, and it's black. And this one's yellow. Now I'm going to run this in debug. And when I press it, it's going to say press, and when I release it, it'll say release. And that's fairly obvious from the code. But if I grab it and I drag it, and then I release it, it doesn't change. I'm not sure why that is, but if I press and release again, then it will. So you could have a timer that runs that checks for that state. I'm not sure how important it is at this point because I haven't made a program with a drag function on it yet. But since I'm going to the trouble of making this video and all this, I thought I would show it to you. Now this APH is the transparency level, and 127 is the highest level. If I change this to 50, you can see that it went a little bit dimmer. And if I change it to 0, it's gone. Now the effect is pretty interesting because this affects what it looks like when you initially load the page or refresh the page. I'm going to set this top one to fly from the bottom. So it's going to go from the bottom up. I'm going to set this box down here to go from the top bottom. And now I'm going to run this. And you can see they did what we thought, but they did it really fast. So another attribute on here is this time. So you can change how fast it happens. I'm going to set this one to fly in from the bottom up over 3 seconds. I'm going to set this one to be 2 seconds. And now you can see they're moving slower, but this one's definitely going a little bit quicker than that one. And they happen at exactly the same time. But there's one more setting here, this first. So you can change. They're both set to 0. I'm going to change this bottom one to 1. So when I originally did this, I thought that 0 would happen first and 1 would happen second. But remember that this one is 1 and this one is 0. And you can see the one that was labeled 1 happens first, and then the one that was labeled 0 happens second. So it counts backwards. So for the effect, we can have it come in from different directions. We can change the order of what we want to come in and when, and then we can set our time. I'm resetting these back to where they are in default just to make the video so you see what exactly happens with each individual one. If you start to combine them, you can have some interesting effects. Now this STA is the background, and it comes default with solid color. So you can change it based upon this background color down here. So we can make it green, let's say. Well, let's go up onto this one and make it green. The other thing you can do is you can have it transparent. So this is better if you have an image in the background. So I'm going to add an image to the background. So on the main page, I'm going to go to the background. And what's neat is this STA is the same whether you're talking about the text box, the background, or any other thing. So we're going to go to an image, and we're going to select this bird. So now we have this as the background. And you can see that it's looking through it. So that's your transparent. But if I go to an image and I select this crop image, it brings up this PICC down here, and it replaced that VCO. So we're going to pick the same image. And you can see as I move it around, it almost looks as if it's transparent. But now I'm going to change the background image to the Cheap Controls logo. And now when I click on it, you can see that when I select crop image and give it an image, it takes that image and it makes it the whole width of the whole thing. And then what becomes the background is whatever you see. So it's almost like this button is overlaid over this whole thing, and then as you make it go smaller or bigger, it crops the image, just like it says. So you can see that image is still there, it's just cropped. Now, if I make it the image itself, and it changes it from PICC, pick crop, to just pick. And we're going to put that bird back in there again. And what it did is it grew the image to the size of the image, or it grew the button to the size of the image. So I'm going to shrink this down. And you're going to see I'm going to get a message. And this message says that it's going to modify the picture. So I'll click yes. And now that picture has changed in its size. Now, when you upload it to your Nextion display or in this IDE, you're not modifying the original copy. You're modifying the one that's being used in the display. What I found interesting is you can't change. If you'll notice, it stays to the scale of the image. But it'll ask me to modify it again. And so we go yes. And then it changes it yet again. So this STA is somewhat of a powerful feature, the way that it can modify your pictures for you and stuff. I'm going to go back to solid color. We'll change it to a different color green. Well, change it to this gray. And that's the STA. So the flat is the way it comes. If I go down to a 3D, it adds some borders around it to make it look like it's either depressed or sticking out. I'm not sure it comes out very well in this video, but you can see that two of the borders are different than the other two borders. And if I tick border, down here it changes it so you can have a border color. We'll set it to red, and a border width, and we'll make it 5. And now you can see that there's a border around it. And once again, the style's up here, and the attributes are down here. We're going to go back to flat. This keyboard is interesting because you can add different keyboards, and what it does is when you click it, it will bring that up and allow you to change the text. You have the full QWERTY, which I'm not going to show you in this video, or the numeric. The numeric are just the 0 through 9. We'll do this one for now because it's a little bit smaller. And when you do that, it has to be global, and it makes you change it before it will add it. So we'll go back up here, change it to global, and now we'll add it again. This adds a font. And down here, it adds this keyboard page. And you can see it's a locked page. But if you want, you can right-click. And it's off the screen, but there's an unlock down at the bottom of this menu. And when you click it, it warns you. Are you sure you want to unlock? We're not going to go into that in this video. But that's what happens behind the scenes when you add this. Now when I click on this and I go back to none, we still have that font and we have this keyboard down here. When I go to delete the keyboard, it wants me to confirm it. Go yes. But then it also is going to delete that font. And that's nice. It kind of cleans itself up. And now we're to the font itself. With the font, I have two loaded, so I can have 0 or I can have 1. Notice that 1's a little bit bigger than 0. But this is something else that we can also change while the program is running. So on press, I'm going to set the font to 1, to the bigger one. And then on release, we're going to have it set to 0. Oh, you can see I still have the thing on it, so I got to go back and set that. But when I click it, it goes big. And when I release it, it goes small. And that's something you could do to emphasize that you know you're clicking on the right button, or that you even know that you've clicked the button. So I'm going to go change this effect to load. I'm going to go down on this one too. I thought, yes, I had set that one back. Now this is the background color. We kind of covered this in the STA function, but you can change it right here to whatever it is you want. But when you're coding it, you can use either text or numbers. We'll make it change on press again. So the command is vscope, and we're going to make it be white. And you can see that white auto-populates down there. And then on release, we'll have it go to red. So there's the white. On release, it's red. White and red. And you can see that we've changed it, that the default is still the green. If I reboot the simulator, it goes back to green. Because over here, we have the vscope set to this. If I had it set to red or white, then that's what it would be. But you can also do numbers in here. So if I want this to go white when I press it, I would use 65,535. And a quick way to find out what these colors are is to go over to your vscope and you can hit this select, this light blue. Okay, and there it changed it. But so now I know that that's 247. So on release, we'll have it go to 2047. Now we'll hit debug. And you can see we get those colors. Now the PCO is the same thing, only it's the text color. And you would just change this B down here to P. So it'd be PCO instead. These two down here are fun because they change where the text is lined up. So you can go left, center, or right. And then the ycen is up, center, and down. And just like the other ones, you don't use the characters. Left would be 0, center would be 1, and right would be 2. And up would be 0, center would be 1, and down would be 2. So if you want to do something with this and make it accentuate that you've pressed the button, you could do that also. So on press, I'd have the X, have it move over to the right. And then on release, I have it come back to the middle. And you can see that I left it where I had it in the settings, because this is where the default was. But when I press it, it'll move to the right, which it did. And now when I release, it'll come back to the middle. And that's how you can move the text within the box. We did the password already, and that just changes it to asterisk or to character. And you can change that on the fly. So if you had a little button out here that said show the characters, which you've seen that on websites and stuff, you could display what's in there. This is the text that you're displaying, and we're going to change this. And we're going to make it say cheap for cheap controls. And then this is tied into this length down here. We're going to change this to 25. So the maximum length that can be in here is 25 characters. I'm going to go back and change this to center again. And now when I click on this, you get this multi-line down here. So if I select multi-line, I can add that word controls, and I'll go OK. And you can see that they're on top of each other. But over here, it's all smashed together, just like you had just typed it in line. And this can be a little bit confusing because there's no indication that you're multi-line other than over here. So, and if I click on it, you can't alter it. Every time I click on it, it brings this up. But if I change this to be single line and then click OK, you can see that it moved it here, and now this looks the same. And now when I click on it, I can either edit it here or I can go back to multi-line. Now this isbr is either set to false or true, and it's the word wrap. So false means that it won't wrap, and you can see that cheap controls is going off the edges a little bit. If I set this to true, then it wraps around. Make this a little wider because this spax controls the spacing between the characters. So if I set this to 10, you can see I don't have the word wrap on, so let's go ahead and change this back to true. It wraps it around. And then if I change the spay, which is the horizontal, the vertical, if I change it to 10, then you get the separation this way. And this can come in handy kind of like we changed the font when you press the button. We can do this with this spax and y. We'll do it with spay or x. So I've set my spax to 5 on press. And then on release, I'm going to set it back to 0. So now when I press it, they separate a little bit. This is kind of an extreme example, but if you changed it to just 1, it would just kind of give it a hint of a movement, and people may not even know that it's moving other than the fact that it just changed a little bit. So now it's set to 1, and you can see that it just kind of moves. It kind of gives you a hint that you've pressed it. It's kind of a neat effect. Now the X and the Y are the uppermost corner up here, so it's the left upper corner. And you can also adjust that on the fly. So if I were to do, let's get rid of the release event, and we'll just have a press event. So every time you press it, we're going to take the X position and we're going to add 10 to it. We're going to do the same thing with Y. So now every time I press it, it moves down the screen. And the final two attributes are the width and the height. Those can only be set before you run the device, and once they're set, they're set. This kind of, I'm not sure why you can't change this on the fly, but that's kind of the way it is. And that's all the attributes for the text box. I cover it differently on the Cheap Controls website. There's a blog post that's assigned to this too, where I have cutout pictures and more text. And if you want to read a little bit more on it, you can head over there. There's a link in the description.
Well, that's about it for this video. If you like what you saw, consider giving me a thumbs up, and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.